was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
It's a real honor and a great pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, Peggy Nash, and the focus of her new book, How Women Win Office in Our Democracies. So despite the expansion of laws guaranteeing formal equality and important recent strides in recent decades, we know that men continue to comprise the majority of elected representatives, cabinet ministers, heads of government. Persistent male bias amongst many voters, unequal patterns of recruitment and promotion within political parties, media representations that discount, if not denigrate, the voices and perspectives of women are just some of the reasons. So how can women and other social groups that are marginalized in our political life break through these systemic barriers? What political strategies, institutional reforms, and policy changes are necessary? And how can changing the composition of our elected representatives empower our democracies to pursue greater equality? In general, speakers in the Frontline series, as Sergio mentioned, tend to be scholars and journalists, helping us grasp important developments and historic milestones in different parts of the world through their research and their writing. But our guest this evening brings hard-won insights from the actual front lines of democracy in Canada as a truly seasoned practitioner from the trenches of civil society to national high politics. Peggy Nash is a long-standing advocate for labor rights and social justice. After earning her BA honors in French language and literature from the University of Toronto, she began her career as a union activist with the Canadian Airlines Employee Association, which later merged with the Canadian Auto Workers, where she rose to the ranks to become a key negotiator. A founding member of Equal Voice, an all-party organization which advocates equal political representation for women in our democracy, Peggy joined electoral politics in 2004, running to represent the federal parliamentary constituency of Parkdale High Park, my own, for the NDP. Undeterred by a narrow defeat, she won that seat then in 2006, becoming the NDP's industry critic. She pushed legislation on a variety of issues, to increase the minimum wage, to reunite immigrant families, to improve public transit, early learning, and childcare, amongst others. Following another defeat in 2008, Peggy returned to the CAW, representing the union at the Canadian Labour Congress, but she quickly rejoined the national political fray, becoming the president of the federal NDP in 2009, and then once again its MP for Parkdale High Park in 2011, going on to serve as the party's finance critic until 2015 in the respective shadow cabinets of the late Jack Layton and Tom Mulcair. Across this long and distinguished career, Peggy has won many awards for her contributions to women's equality, social justice, and democratic life. From being recognized as the best MP in Toronto in 2006, to receiving a Woman of Distinction Award from the YWCA in 2009, to her appointment to the Order of Canada in 2020. Peggy currently serves as a senior advisor to the Dean of Arts at the Toronto Metropolitan University, where she also chairs the Centre for Labour Management Relations Advisory Committee. In 2018, she co-founded the Women in the House program with Professor Tracy Rainey. The program is Canada's first and only experiential 4-credit course of its kind, designed to equip students with both a theoretical and a practical understanding of women in Canadian politics and intersectional policymaking. Simply put, it's pretty hard to imagine someone more qualified and better placed to write her new book, Women Winning Office, an activist guide to getting elected. So Peggy is going to provide some of the highlights from this book and her long, distinguished career, and she and I will then have a discussion based on some of those themes before inviting all of you to join us. So please do with questions and comments that you might have. With that, please join me in welcoming Peggy Nash.
Thank you, Sanjay, for that lovely, thorough introduction. And welcome, everyone, to this discussion this evening. What a beautiful room we're in. Thank goodness for public space and for our public libraries. Let's hear it for public libraries. So before I really get into my remarks, I'd just like to get a sense of who's in the room. So if you'll play along with me for a minute, if you can, I'd like you to raise your hand if you think that we need more women, as well as non-binary, gender diverse people, Black, Indigenous, people of color, elected to all levels of government. Raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Keep your hand up. If you voted in the last Ontario election. Okay, not everyone may have been able to. Okay, thank you. Keep your hand up. Keep your hand up if you took part in some additional way, if you were active in supporting a candidate, or you attended a meeting, you donated. Okay, good. Some of you, thank you. Keep your hand up if you have run or are thinking about running in an election. I see. Okay, great. Anybody running this fall in the Toronto Municipal or any municipal? Okay, well done. Thank you. So just by your reaction, and thank you for doing that, most of you share the goal of wanting to elect more and diverse women candidates. Most of you vote. Some of you have gotten involved and are thinking of running for office. Well done, and actually running for office. Now, what I'd like to do this evening is related to my recent book, Women Winning Office, An Activist Guide to Getting Elected. I want to share with you a bit about my journey in politics while examining the intersection of identity and movements and the relationship between activism and electoral politics. So some questions I'll try to answer tonight after you've answered the questions I asked you. Some questions I'll try to answer is, why should we get involved? Why me? Why you? Why does it matter if we run? Why don't we have more women elected? Why does that matter? And how does electoral politics fare versus community activism? What's the relationship? And lastly, how do we transform politics and perhaps more importantly, our electoral representation in general? So let me begin with my experience. Why me? Well, frankly, I never expected to run for elected office. That was not at all in the cards. I grew up in a working class family in Rexdale, and it was in the very sexist Mad Men era of the time. I was the first in my family to go to university, and I did so paying my way with a series of part-time jobs, just like many young people do today. The difference today is you can actually pay your way because you could actually pay your way. You can't anymore. But as a young woman, I had big ambitions about what I want to do, but a lot of self-doubt. I was interested mainly in languages. I did a languages degree. I thought I might be a writer or a filmmaker. Those were my ambitions at the time. I was active in solidarity movements, and I engaged in refugee support, solidarity with refugees. However, the job that I had at university, while I was at university, and I just stayed in that job after I graduated, had a union, and I began to get involved in that union. So it was completely by accident, and that led me on a particular path. It took me on a journey. Now, I really came into my own as an activist in the labor movement. So I was fighting for workers' rights, but also within the labor movement, I was fighting as a feminist and as a human rights activist. So I had external struggles, but I also had a lot of internal struggles. As we do, I grew over time, and I understood better intersectional feminism, gender diversity, trans rights, disability rights, the importance of anti-racism work, and generally the importance of women's leadership. The era when I got active was, I think, as turbulent as the era today. It was during the rise of neoliberalism, an era of high interest rates, which we're experiencing today, maybe not quite as high as a few decades ago. It was also an era of deregulation, privatization, free trade agreements, and a lot of disruption in the economy. A lot of workers lost their jobs. It was difficult to make progress. It taught me about class politics because I understood what side of the issues I was on, and it helped me understand the intersection between class politics and identity politics, and that really understanding the economics of all of those struggles. But I remember being accused of dividing the movement, dividing the labor movement, because I was fighting for greater inclusivity and recognizing how some were treated differently. But that was not my view at all. My view has been and continues to be that movements, all movements, are stronger when they are inclusive, when we engage the talent, the ability, the skills, the representation of as many people as possible. And I remember vividly the first women's conference I organized way back. It was in the early 1980s. And my union at that point, my little union I belonged to, was mostly women. Probably about 80% of our members were women. But all of the union reps were men. And I'm trying to organize this women's conference, and I remember going around to the men, and they were all decent guys, and I said to them, I want to do a workshop on sexual harassment, and has anybody ever come to you with a complaint about sexual harassment? No, nobody'd ever raised it. But I remember when we had the workshop was given by Janice Serra, who today I believe is a professor out in British Columbia. But she did this workshop, and I remember all the women were sitting around in a circle, and she asked who had experienced sexual harassment or who had witnessed sexual harassment. And the hands started to go up, and we went around the room, and almost every person in that room had some experience, and so we began to share our expertise that would have been invisible. It was invisible because no one had asked, no one gave those women the opportunity to share their experiences. So as I developed as a leader in the union, obviously I gained more confidence. Any movement gives you the opportunity to develop skills: public speaking, negotiation, chairing meetings, engaging with the media. I was writing briefs and presenting to committees. Movements help us develop these skills and help us build networks of like-minded people. And I learned about so many issues. I was involved in issues like gender violence, free trade agreements, pay and employment equity, health care funding, employment standards, child care, many different issues. It was really a privilege to be able to soak up so much. And yet I never considered taking those skills and this knowledge to the political arena. My home was in the movement. Why should I leave? Why me? What could I offer? Well, there are many reasons why women are underrepresented in politics, and some are internal, just as it was with me. Why me? Maybe I need to study more. Maybe I need to take more courses, learn more, get a bigger resume. Maybe I'm not a good enough speaker. We can always find reasons to doubt ourselves. But I would argue most of the barriers are external. Systemic biases about who can be a good leader, underlying sexist and racist and homophobic concepts of what is a good leader get reflected in political parties. Who gets recruited? Who gets to run in a winnable seat? Who gets supported and promoted in the media? Who has the networks, the finances, the resume? And also another barrier is how the media treats candidates. And so what does this mean? Well, it shows up in the statistics. Internationally, if you look at the G20 most powerful countries in the world, you get this group of high-powered leaders together. How many women? One. There's one woman, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission. But Canada surely does much better. We have a gender equal cabinet, and that's important to show these role models, women heading up foreign affairs, defense, finance, deputy prime minister. These things are important. Surely Canada does better in terms of representation. But no, we're at 30% women in our parliament, 59th in the world, according to the International, or the Interparliamentary Union ranking of women's representation. But surely 30% is a good number, and it is. It's much better than where we were a few decades ago. But whereas the UN in the 1990s thought 30% was the magic number, that was the number we needed to gain a critical mass of women that could change the culture of an organization. No, it wasn't. What we found was these institutions, in our case in Canada, colonial institutions where, when they were created, only landowning men, white men, could vote. And that's not who we are today. But the institutions are the same. So there are real cultural barriers that underlie our political institutions that I think need updating. But surely you say the province and territories must do better. They're closer to us. They have big expenditures on healthcare and education. Surely there's more women. Well, if you look at the leaders of the premiers of the territories and the provinces, out of 13 leaders, how many are women? 2. Now, we have had more, but right now we have 2. But surely municipally we do better. That's the closest level of government. You don't have to travel. It's right in your neighborhood. It's the closest level of government to everyone. Surely we have better representation. But if you look at the representation of women who are mayors in the 100 biggest communities in Canada, 20% are women. 44% had no women candidates running for mayor. Now, we do have more women as councillors. In some cases, we get up to 30%. Montreal just had a wonderful election and elected many, many women, not only mayor, but as the city councillors. But clearly, we're not doing enough. I mean, we all know there's a double bind for women in politics. So if you run as a woman, you get described as, you know, how you appear, are you smiling, do you seem empathetic, are you friendly? And yet what we seem to want in a leader is someone who's decisive, who's firm, who's strong, who's courageous. Well, I don't know about you, but women I know are tough, courageous, they're incredibly organized, incredible multitaskers, but they still walk this fine line, because if you appear too strong, you're angry. Remember angry Hillary and angry Andrea? And so you can't be too angry, but if you're too smiley, well, you're not tough enough. So there is this double bind. So why does all this matter? Well, let me ask you, why has it taken us 2 generations to get a national childcare program? Why did it take a pandemic to expose so many of the societal inequities that we have, and what are we going to do about them? Why is our military still rife with misogyny and harassment? Why is our healthcare so underfunded? Why are so many Indigenous people ending up in our criminal justice system rather than those who oppressed and tortured Indigenous kids? Why do our transit systems rely on riders' fares rather than investments from all levels of government? I could go on. I have a whole list of why is it's here. But let me just say that these challenges, these lacks that we have, I see as motivation for running for elected office. We need the voices of women and other underrepresented groups. And it's not that women are guaranteed to be better leaders, but they do tend to value social spending more, and they tend to see the social causes of problems and to support social solutions. So the why of running is crucially important. So what's the link between social causes and politics, the link between activism and elections? Well, so many women get involved in their community. They're involved in their school associations, in unions, in church organizations. They create soup kitchens. They create clothing exchanges. They do so much great work. They fight to keep swimming pools open or to get a crosswalk. So they can be leaders with strong voices fighting for their communities, but they still often don't see themselves running for office. It's something for someone else. That's how I felt. But elected representatives have a different power from movements. They have the power to pass laws, the power to spend or not spend public money, the power to regulate powerful interests. Now, there's been some tension between movements and parties. Movements are often disappointed that elected reps can't make change fast enough. Parties, they have the job of trying to win elections and negotiate solutions, and they feel sometimes movements make unrealistic demands of them and don't support their work. Perhaps both sides have some truth. But politicians can stay connected with movements and bring movement politics into elected office. They can work together both inside and outside elected offices. And I'm going to engage in the vanity of reading something from my book. And it's right near the end, and there's two parts I want to read. First, bring activism inside. Why can't politicians of the left bring their outside political activism inside to the corridors of power? Why can't elected political representatives maintain their links to activist movements, organizing and educating to broaden the engagement of those communities and individuals affected by political decisions? Why can't the energy of activists who are elected to political office be channeled into opening up the windows and doors of politics to provide better information and accountability? Wouldn't a little transparency be great? I think we can do that. I believe there's an urgency to better representation. For me, the urgency was when my frustration as a community activist boiled over. In the early 2000s, politicians promising and not delivering, giving half answers, promising social programs, and delivering austerity. And we may once again now be on the brink of austerity. So that's why I decided to run. I felt the urgency to make a difference that I didn't seem to be able to make on the outside. Progress that we were making, for example, in the union and collective bargaining, was getting clawed back by government actions. We would hold women's marches and rallies, and government said nice things but didn't act. I wanted to bring the outside inside. How to run was a mystery to me, and I see one of my wonderful campaign managers is here. He knows I just did what he said, run. So with my book, I wanted to encourage others to run, to demystify the process, to make it easier to discover what I discovered. I want to encourage others to run, not just different faces, but to help create a transformation in how we do politics. Politicians who follow through, who genuinely engage with the community, and the best ones now do that. We can do and be so much better. We need to lead like women and be the change we want. We need better representation to make decisions. We not only need to do more and elect more and diverse women, we need people who work in the service sector, who have trouble making rent, regular people to run and win elected office. We need to see ourselves in governments to have more confidence in governments. I don't believe that just changing who gets in means there's automatic changes in governments. That's why I support progressive activists, people who want a fair and more just representation in governments. So what will that look like? We don't know what we haven't created yet. Imagining a better world, a world of economic, environmental, and social justice, allows us to set our sights on where we want to go. Getting there is not impossible. It just hasn't happened yet. Thank you.
So much in this book. I should say I have taught politics for many, many years, mostly in another place. I mean, in terms of my research, I'm on India. So for me, the word you used was absolutely right. You demystified this process. It's a remarkable book because it's so direct and clearly written, and it really opens up the entire process from the first part of the book. You know, why should anyone want to run for office? It's an important question to ask. And then in the process of giving lots of practical insights and lessons you've learned, some hard lessons you've learned too, touching upon some big themes. So I was hoping what we could do to start the conversation before everyone else can join in is to think about some of these themes. So I sort of think the book has sort of three major sort of areas or themes that we might broach. You know, one is the obstacles, as you say, for women and others who are marginalized for running for office and winning. The second is what we might call the dilemmas of representation. You touched upon some of those in your opening remarks between movements and parties. And the third might be sort of the wider lessons, because the book is written in the title, as you say, for a specific group of people. And I was wondering for those, sort of what might the wider lessons be? So we sort of started with the first sort of set of issues. You outlined in your opening remarks, there are many barriers that women have faced in running for office in Canada and many other countries around the world. And just before coming this evening, I did some research before I was arriving, and it seems that the first member of parliament who was a woman in Canada was 1921. It was almost 100 years ago. And it didn't really change very much until the 1980s, 1990s, and there was a big increase, and then it sort of plateaued. So in your own career, when you think back over, say, these last 2 decades, maybe a bit further back, and you have a long list in the book of different barriers, which ones do you think mattered more before in terms of obstacles? And what would you say are the biggest obstacles today for women running for office?
I think 30 or 40 years ago, I think one of the biggest obstacles was women ever imagining that they could be there. I mean, you didn't see women reflected in politics. It certainly there just wasn't the representation. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a period in the 60s where there were actually no women elected federally, and very few women at other levels of government. So the thought that this was remember in the 60s, you needed your husband's signature to get a mortgage or a loan from a bank, or start a business. You were required to change your name when you got married. You were required to get married, basically. I mean, it was a decision if you were not, right after school, going to get married. So I think it just wasn't in the mindset. But the second wave of the women's movement really offered women another opportunity, which was that no, you didn't have to follow that path. You could get involved in, you could have a career. You could decide you didn't need a man. And I think then, I just think there were many other careers that maybe were more appealing for women. There was a sense of politics maybe being unladylike. Goodness gracious, I feel like, you get the vapors thinking about that. But it's, because the notion that power was the antithesis of the image of a lady. But, the world has changed, and yet the residue of some of these stereotypes remains, so many stereotypes. So it's, there was, who does the Tonight Show, the comic from South Africa? Trevor Noah. A woman asked him recently, what's the difference between racism in South Africa and the United States? And I thought his answer was brilliant. He said, in South Africa, there were the apartheid laws, and you couldn't live in certain areas. You had a pass book. You were beaten up. You worked for a pittance. Racism was so obvious. But in the States, you spend so much time just to prove that racism is real, and that the Rodney King murder and other recent events have kind of said, oh, gee, I didn't know that racism was a real thing. And I think it's similar with sexism in the sense that in the 1960s or 70s, it was so obvious. And today, it's like, well, are you crazy? Of course, we have equality for women. So it's much more subtle, and yet you see the results by the outcome of elections.
And would you say, I was just thinking of what we read in the press this week, that the public safety minister has had to distribute panic buttons to lots of members of parliament, because in this era that we live in, it's very polarized, which is the polarization's increased because of the pandemic. There's a lot of hate directed at MPs, particularly women and parliamentarians of color, racialized Canadians. That must be that's a huge factor, and why even some have decided not to run again.
It's a factor for sure. There was a woman, Jo Cox, a Labour politician, who was murdered in the UK. But I address this, I talk about it in the book in terms of violence against women, certainly the impact of hate in the social media that gets directed towards any kind of non-typical person who is in the media and politics, who stands out as a leader. And you need to think about it, just like you need to think about racism or Islamophobia or any kind of hate. But you can't let that silence you. Like, the goal of that hate is to exclude and to silence, and we just can't let that happen. So you need to be aware of it, and you need to have strategies. If you're running for office, your team needs to help you with strategies. When I was elected and I left politics in 2015, we were on social media, but the level of attacks are much more intense now. But I would post on social media, but I never looked at the answers, or I never looked at what people were sending me. If someone was sending me something who was a legitimate constituent or someone I needed to reply to, I would let my team handle that, and they would get that to me. But then it's stressful for them too. In a way, they kind of need to detoxify from that. I think it is getting insanely more intense. But again, we can't go backwards. I think the way to deal with that is to go forward. And, you know, where needed, have security present, you know, whether it's at a meeting, or treat hate messages seriously if need be, if it's appropriate, to let authorities know, whether it's the social media outlet or whether it's police or security. I mean, I think we have to protect ourselves, but we cannot silence ourselves.
In the book, you mention your own experience, and you talked about this now just earlier, about stereotypes that exist in our public culture that we may actually internalize ourselves. And you said that even in the labor movement, which was so formative for you and so important in Canada for many of the progress that we've made, that you said, you know, when you were with the CAW, your own union, I guess this would have been in the 80s, if I read that bit of the book correctly, you know, it's a quote, you were told that people weren't ready for a woman leader. And then even later, when there was a section in the book, you talked about the decision to run for the leadership of the federal NDP. There was a moment where you said there were certain voices saying, is this the right time to elect a woman as leader? So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that? Because on the one hand, the labor movement and the NDP are very progressive forces in Canada, and yet even within those movements, you say very candidly, you encountered resistance and obstacles and discouragement at some crucial moments, and thankfully you ignored all of it and you decided to run.
I've always been a slow learner. Yeah, I mean, you know, we're all imperfect, and it doesn't make it any easier, but you know, I think we're seeing some leadership changes. I see labor leaders here tonight, and I think we're seeing some changes in the labor movement, which is positive. But, you know, again, cultures take time to change. And I felt when I was in my union, even though I did kind of mainstream negotiations, that I was also really trying to change the culture. And the way I approached that was to organize, because nobody can do anything themselves. You always have to build a team and try to build numbers to change a culture, and that can take time. Yeah, some things go more slowly than you would like. It doesn't mean I didn't love the work of the union and the progress that they were making and the work that they were doing, but they're imperfect, you know, and they're still imperfect. There is a woman running for the leader of that union now, so we'll see, fingers crossed. But in the party too, I mean, I think, you know, these were members who were voting. Yeah, people told me I ran for the leadership of the NDP, and I had a few people say to me, well, we tried a woman leader, didn't work out. And I always said that by, pardon? I was there now. And, you know, it's, you know, I used to joke that by that measure, because I think at that time there'd been like, before Justin Trudeau, there'd been like 4 Liberal leaders who, you know, I said, by that measure, the Liberals would never elect another man as leader. Right. But you know, it's people are not emblematic of their gender or race or anything else. We're all individuals. But yeah, that was a bias. And I know that, I don't think it's the reason that I wasn't successful as leader, but I do know that there were stereotypes because we were official opposition. Could we have won the next election? And so people were thinking, we're not just electing a leader, we're electing someone who could be prime minister. So, well, can't be her. So right. I knew that was part of it.
And this in a party that had Alexa McDonough as leader, had Audrey McLaughlin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's you know, it's an imperfect party. It's a progressive party. It's the party I support and work for. But, you know, we're all people, and we're all at different places. This wasn't the leadership saying that, but this, people, I always said with the union, we are representative of society. And so as a party, we're representative of society, and society has a lot of stereotypes.
There's an intriguing line in the book. You say, and I'm quoting here, "It's easier to elect women in a political culture where people generally support and trust government." That's the end of the quote. And you gave us some statistics which were quite striking about Canada. We have a often very progressive self-image. I know this in lots of different fields, and yet, in amongst the G20 or the OECD and many other countries, we don't fare that well. And that line really jumped out at me, because when we do think of, and it's quite interesting, there are different types of regimes in countries where women are empowered as elected representatives or as leaders. This quote really made me think, of course, of the social democrat countries of Scandinavia in particular, where there's very high levels of social trust in government generally. And you often see, whether it's in the Baltic states now, in Scandinavia, a lot of women leaders. So I wonder if you could tell us more about that. It's easier to elect women in a political culture where people generally support and trust government. Because this is also a really key message in your book about faith in public service, in government, in public goods, and what the state can provide.
Yeah, I think that, I think social cohesion is important, and the greater inequality you have in society, the less social cohesion you have. So in countries that are extremely unequal, you see increasingly the election of what I'd call strongman leaders. We saw President Trump, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Turkey, Russia. There are many countries like that, but where you have faith in government as the ability to achieve social good, the ability to bring people together and make decisions that, on behalf of everyone, I think that, you have faith in government, and I think where you have that faith, often countries are better able to elect women. I mean, the country right now that's on everyone's radar is Finland. Well, Finland's a very small country, but they elected a woman who at that time was was the youngest world leader. And she heads a coalition of 5 parties, all headed by women. So it's a sharp contrast to what we see in some other places. So I was looking at this, I was writing during the pandemic. This was my pandemic project. And I was researching the role of national leaders during the pandemic. So Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, and of course I looked at Finland and the country next door, Sweden. Well, Sweden has had a guy who's heading up that government, and his decision was like the Americans: let's just let it rip, let the pandemic rip, and we'll, hopefully that will get the best outcome. And their mortality rate, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but their mortality rate compared with Finland, right next door, was astronomical. And later, he actually, to his credit, said, well, maybe that wasn't the best, maybe that wasn't the best decision. But, I do look at a place like New Zealand, granted, island, a lot of difference. But there are other countries where you have leaders where there was enough trust in the state to take action that reduced the amount of mortality from and incidence of COVID-19. Now, we don't have a woman leader in Canada, but one could argue that our Prime Minister exhibited many of those traits in terms of empathy with people and the willingness of government to work with people and bring them through the pandemic, as opposed to countries where people were left more on their own.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think of the number of countries, I think it's certainly in the first phase, before we had the vaccines, where prudence was so important. I think it was very striking how many countries where the leaders were women were more prudent. I think the one exception to that might have been South Korea. I mean, in terms of the leader of the country was a man, but Taiwan's another example, of course, in East Asia. I was wondering if you could just move, and if any of you have questions, comments, please. Like I said, we very much want to be part of the discussion. I just wanted to move to the next section in the book, because one of the book, as you've said and we said, is a how-to guide, but there's lots of these pearls of wisdom I found in the book on certain themes, and one of them, which is so important in a sense, it's both the text and the subtext of the book, is what does it mean to be a representative? What does it mean to be an elected representative? And I thought there are sort of two tensions that we have in our democratic politics. You touch upon them a little bit in the book, and I wanted to see if we could talk a little bit more about that. One is about the tensions, the trade-offs, sometimes the conflicts. Once you're elected, right? So the first part of the book is, do you decide to run? If so, what does it take to win? And then when you win, it's a great line in the book, be prepared to lose, but be also prepared to win, right? Because you might win when you don't think you're going to win, and then you have to face the reality of being an elected representative. So in Canada, our democracy rates very highly on most international surveys, right? Whether it's Varieties of Democracy, Freedom House, whatever it might be. And yet, most political scientists who study Canada are very struck by the fact that power is very concentrated in our democracy. Parties over their elected representatives, party leaders over others in the party, and then once you're in government, the Prime Minister's office in Canada, even amongst Westminster parliamentary democracies, I think is probably the most powerful Prime Minister's office. There's a great deal of executive concentration of executive power in our democracies. And so a lot of times, we read this all the time. I think of the Samara Center of Democracy has done two very important reports over the last decade, Tragedy in the Commons and another one, Real House Lives, where they've done exit interviews with parliamentarians who are leaving office. And they say that most of them, regardless of their NDP or Conservative, they're rural riding or urban, men or women, all left Parliament feeling very frustrated. That they were leaders, as you said, in their communities. That's why they decided to run. They ran for different, they had different values, but there was a key value of public service. They get into Parliament, and suddenly they feel like they're just foot soldiers. There's a party whip, you vote according to your party, and so there's this great dilemma they feel. They're elected by constituents for a riding, but then they're in Parliament, and they have to, in a sense, fall in line with their party, the party line, right? And this isn't any democracy, but it's very striking comparative to say, in Canada, it's really accentuated. So how did you deal with that as an MP, right? You represent the NDP, but you represent Parkdale High Park. And you had won a plurality of votes, which is why you were the MP twice, but there were others presumably in the riding who voted for other parties. And how did you balance and navigate that sort of tension?
Yeah, I was surprised to read that there is greater concentration of power in the PMO in Canada than in the office of the President of the United States. That kind of shocked me. But there is that tension, there's no question. And I talk in the book about should you run with a party or no party. If you run municipally, there isn't a formal party structure. Informally, there are different alliances. But if you choose to run with the party, it really helps to have a strong alignment with that party, because if not, you're going to be very frustrated. And even so, there's always going to be things that are difficult for you to accept. But if you run with a party, that party helps you get elected. That party well, sometimes it can hurt, I guess, depending on the election, but usually you count on the party to help you get elected. The media, the resources, this can be very helpful as a politician. And so it is a two-way street in the sense that if you run with a party, you are expected to align with that party. And it doesn't mean you can never part ways in terms of votes. I mean, there are lots of free votes where you can vote however you want, but there are lots of votes that are called whipped votes where you are expected to vote along party lines. Now, if you're running with a party that's aligned with your values, usually you're on side with those votes. You want to support what they're recommending, but not always. I've seen people just go take a walk during a vote because they didn't want to vote the way their party was recommending that they vote. And in some cases, the breach has been so strong that people have left their party and gone and sat as an independent. And I'm looking at you, Dominic, who was in a class I was just doing, and he was the leader of his party in this class, and he got others to come and join him in his party. And so sometimes people leave. That's a pretty extreme event, but people do leave their parties when they find that it's that distance is just too great. And we saw with Judy Wilson-Raybould, with Selena Caesar-Chavin, that sometimes it's just unacceptable. I mean, did I have frustrations? Absolutely. I've always felt the leader's office had too much power, and a lot of young activists around the leader who are telling you as a member of parliament, this is the way things are going to be, or this is our position on a given issue. I don't want to make it sound more negative than I felt. I usually felt that there were amazing young activists who get involved, and again, we were usually all on the right on the same side. But sometimes to do something for your constituents might be at odds with your own values. So in my area, we have a large Polish community, wonderful, long-time community. They're usually very observant, very religious, and when Pope John Paul was, I think the right word is beatified in Rome. I mean, I'm not religious, but I knew my community would like me to be there. I had the opportunity to be there, and I felt it was important for them. So it wasn't something I objected to, but something I felt was important for the community that wasn't necessarily my issue. So you have to judge. I think you're close to your community. I mean, I embraced the issues that were important to my community. We have a big Ukrainian community, and Tibetan communities, so I became the go-to person for these communities. And sometimes, again, there was tension with our party, and you just have to kind of work it out. But if you can't, it's like, I mean, a relationship, if you can't make it work, at some point it breaks. You just have to hope it doesn't get there.
I have